Section 44 of All About Coffee. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. All About Coffee by William Ukers. A Short History of Coffee Advertising, Part 3. Joint Coffee Trade Publicity Campaign. 20 years ago, the author began an agitation for cooperative advertising by the coffee trade. He suggested as a slogan, "Tell the truth about coffee." And it is gratifying to find that many of his original ideas have been embodied in the present Joint Coffee Trade Publicity Campaign, now in its 4th year. The coffee roasters at first were slow to respond to the cooperative advertising suggestion, because in those days, competition was more unenlightened than now, and therefore more ruthless. It needed organization to bring the trade to a better understanding of the benefits certain to be shared by all when their individual interests were pooled in a common cause. Leaders of the best thought in the trade, however, were quick to realize that only by united effort was it possible to achieve real progress. And when it was suggested that the first step was to organize the roasting trade, the idea took so firm a hold that it only needed someone to start it to bring together in one combination the keenest minds in the business. The coffee roasters organized their national association in 1911. The author of this work urged that cooperative advertising based upon scientific research should be done by the roasters themselves, independently of the growers. But it was found impracticable to unite diverging interests on such an issue. And so the leaders of the movement bent all their energies toward promoting a campaign that would be backed jointly by growers and distributors, since both would receive equal benefit from any resulting increase in consumption. Brazil, the source of nearly 3/4 of the world's coffee, was the logical ally, and an appeal was made to the planters of that country. A party of 10 leading United States roasters and importers visited Brazil in 1912 at the invitation of the federal government. In Brazil, as in the United States, progress resulted from organization. The planters of the state of Sao Paulo, who produce more than 1/2 of all coffee used in the United States, were the first to appreciate the propaganda idea. After their attempts to interest the national government failed, the Sao Paulo coffee men founded the Sociedade Promotora de Defesa do Café, Society to Promote the Defense of Coffee, and persuaded their state legislature to pass a law taxing every bag of coffee shipped from the plantations of that state in a period of 4 years. This tax, amounting to 100 reis per bag of 132 pounds, or about 2.5 cents United States money at even exchange rates, is collected by the railroads from the shippers and turned over to the Sociedade. The Brazilian Society sent to the United States a special envoy, Theodore Longard de Menezes, to conclude arrangements. And on March 4th, 1918, in New York, the pact was signed, whereby Sao Paulo was to contribute to the publicity campaign in the United States approximately $960,000 at the rate of $240,000 a year for 4 years. And the members of the trade in the United States were to contribute altogether $150,000. The success of the negotiations was due to the skillful management of Ross W. Weir in the United States and to the superior salesmanship of Louis R. Gray, the Arbuckle representative in Brazil. Supervision of the advertising in the United States was delegated to 5 men, representing both the importing and roasting branches of the trade, and designated as the Joint Coffee Trade Publicity Committee of the United States. 3 of these committee men, Ross W. Weir of New York, F. J. Ock of Dayton, Ohio, and George S. Wright of Boston, are roasters. And 2, William Bain Jr. and C. H. Stoffregen, both of New York, are importers and jobbers, or green coffee men. The committee organized with Mr. Weir as chairman, Mr. Wright as treasurer, and Mr. Stoffregen as secretary. At the invitation of the committee, C.W. Brand of Cleveland, then president of the National Coffee Roasters Association, attended committee meetings and assisted in determining the policies of the campaign. Headquarters were established at 74 Wall Street in the heart of the New York Coffee District, with Felix Coste as secretary-manager and Alan P. Ames as publicity director. N.W. Ayer & Son, advertising agents of Philadelphia, who had engineered the plan of campaign from the start of the movement in the National Coffee Roasters Association, handled the advertising account. Sao Paulo's contribution to the advertising fund is sent in monthly installments to the Joint Coffee Trade Publicity Committee under an agreement that it shall be expended only for magazine and newspaper space. Supplementing this Brazilian contribution is the fund raised by voluntary subscriptions from the coffee trade of the United States on the basis of 1 cent per bag, handled annually. This American fund is used for the expenses of administration, for educational advertising outside of magazine and newspaper space, and for various kinds of trade promotion and dealer stimulation. The first advertising appeared in April 1919 in 306 leading newspapers in 182 large cities, with a total circulation of more than 16 million. The cities chosen represented all the centers of wholesale coffee distribution. Magazine advertising began in June of the same year using 21 periodicals, all of national circulation. This list has been changed from time to time to meet the special needs of the campaign. More than 50 grocery trade magazines have carried the committee's dealer advertising, although not all of these have been used continuously. Every part of the country was represented on the trade paper list. Full pages have been run each month in 9 of the leading national medical journals. These advertisements were written by a physician of national reputation. Under the caption, "The Case for Coffee," these advertisements have discussed the properties of coffee from the physiological standpoint and have asked the doctors to judge it fairly. From the start, the committee's advertising has been broadly educational. The properties of coffee have been discussed. Charges against coffee have been answered. The housekeeper has been told how to get the best results from the coffee she buys. Hotel and restaurant proprietors have been reminded that many of them owe their prosperity largely to a reputation for serving good coffee. New uses have been exploited for coffee, as a flavoring agent for desserts and other sweets. Employers have been taught the important service good coffee may render in increasing the comfort and efficiency of their working forces. Magazine and newspaper advertising is only the nucleus of the campaign. The effect of such white space publicity is increased by simultaneous efforts to merchandise the campaign, to stimulate the interest of the wholesale and retail trade, to encourage private brand advertising, and to reach the consumer by other kinds of publicity recognized as essential factors in a well-rounded national advertising effort. These activities may be summarized as follows. Information service. This department answers inquiries and supplies material for household editors and for newspaper and magazine writers. Through a national clipping service, it keeps in touch with all published matter relating to coffee. Its special duty is to answer attacks on coffee and the coffee trade. Merchants and dealers make it a practice when they find misleading articles or editorials in their local newspapers to send clippings to the committee's headquarters to be handled there as the situation warrants. Scientific coffee research. $22,500 of the American Fund have been appropriated thus far for scientific coffee research at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The reports of this research will be distributed to the coffee trade throughout the country and should prove valuable in all branches of coffee merchandising. The findings will be distributed by the committee to schools and colleges and to consumers through national advertising. The Coffee Club. This organization was established for the purpose of educating the consumer through constructive teamwork by the roasters and jobbers, salesman, and the retail dealer. Under this plan, the committee has distributed 50,000 transparent signs for dealers' windows and 5,000 bronze Coffee Club buttons for coffee salesmen. By reference to the Coffee Club in national magazine and newspaper advertising, the retailer is given a chance to tie up with the campaign. Membership in the club is limited to those who are contributing to the publicity fund and to their salesmen and customers. The club publishes a monthly bulletin in newspaper form giving the news of the campaign. This has a circulation of 27,000 among wholesalers, salesmen, and dealers. Booklets. The committee has published 6 booklets which have reached a total circulation of more than 1.5 million copies. These booklets are sold at cost to the coffee trade. The committee reports that, on an average, 100 requests for them are received daily at its office from consumers in different parts of the country, and that the booklets are the means of a constant campaign of education in American homes and schools. Brand advertising. The committee is constantly making efforts to increase the amount of private advertising by coffee roasters, and it estimates that brand advertising has increased at least 300% since the national campaign began. Reproductions of the committee's advertisements, proofs of advertising electrotypes, and copy suggestions are circulated in advance to all roasters and to a large number of retailers by means of the monthly organ, the Coffee Club. Coffee Week. During the week of March 29 to April 4, 1920, the committee organized and financed the Third National Coffee Week, which was observed by retailers throughout the country. The feature of this week was a window trimming contest for which prizes of $2,000 were distributed among several hundred grocers. The contest resulted in displays of coffee in nearly 10,000 grocery windows and greatly increased the sale and consumption of coffee during this period. Motion pictures. The United States Fund financed the production and distribution of a coffee motion picture, 128 prints of which were sold to roasters, who exhibited them throughout the country. This picture was shown during Coffee Week to more than 600 theater audiences, and it remains in the possession of the trade as an active advertising medium. New uses for coffee. An important factor in increasing consumption has been the promotion of new uses for coffee. In winter, this has taken the form of recipes and suggestions for coffee as a flavoring agent, and in warm weather, there has been a publicity drive for iced coffee. Propaganda results. The Joint Coffee Trade Publicity Campaign is progressive. New features are being developed, and plans are laid well in advance. It is expected that the reports of the scientific research will furnish fresh material for both direct and indirect advertising. One of the interesting prospects is a school exhibit, demand for which has been revealed by requests from a large number of teachers, principals, and school superintendents. Efforts to increase the popularity of a product as widely used as coffee suggest almost unlimited opportunities. The campaign has brought into cooperation producers in one country and manufacturers and distributors in another country, several thousand miles apart. Its international character, and also the fact that it deals with a product of almost universal use, may account for the attention this campaign has received, not only in the United States, but in every country where advertising is a business factor. This kind of coffee publicity has given the consumer a better knowledge of coffee, and broken down much of the prejudice against coffee that rested upon popular misunderstanding of its physiological effects. As best evidence of its sincere wish to give the public the whole truth about coffee, the committee points to the fact that a portion of its funds is being used to finance the scientific investigation at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Felix Coste, the secretary-manager of the campaign, spends much of his time traveling around the country and addressing gatherings of coffee wholesalers and dealers. By this means, and by continuous circularization and correspondence, the trade is kept constantly in touch with the developments of the campaign. Although Brazil is the only coffee-producing country at present cooperating, the advertising has treated all coffees alike. Efforts are being made to have the coffee growers of other countries contribute on a basis proportionate to the benefit they derive. Support from all the coffee countries on the same scale as that on which the producers of Sao Paulo are contributing would almost double the size of the fund. Coffee advertising efficiency. Reverting to the original advertisement for coffee in English, when we compare it with the latest examples of advertising art, It is of the same order of merit. But Pascual Rosé had no advertising experts to advise him, and no precedents to follow. Pascual Rosé was a native of Smyrna who was brought to London by a Mr. Edwards, a dealer in Turkish merchandise, to whom he acted as a sort of personal servant. One of his principal duties was the preparation of Mr. Edwards' morning drink of Turkish coffee. But the novelty thereof, history tells us, drawing too much company to him, he, Mr. Edwards, allowed his said servant with another of his son-in-law to sell it publicly. So it came about that Pascual Rosé set up a coffee house in St. Michael's Alley, Cornhill. And since Pascual Rosé's idea, naturally, was to acquaint the London public with the virtues and delectable qualities of the product of which his prospective customers were naturally uninformed, he put into his advertisement those facts and arguments which he felt would be most likely to attract attention, to excite interest, and to convince. If the reader will glance at Rosé's advertisement, which is reproduced on page 55, he will be struck with the well-nigh irresistible charm of his unaffected, straightforward bid for patronage. Having no advertising fetishes to warp his judgment, he told an interesting story in a natural manner, carrying conviction. It matters not that some of the virtues attributed to the drink have since been disallowed. He believed them to be true. Few there were in those days who knew the real truth about coffee. Even his typography, unstudied from the standpoint of modern display, is attractive, appropriate, and exceedingly pleasant to the eye. And since at that time there was no cereal substitute or other bugaboos to contend against, and to hinder him from doing the simple, obvious thing in advertising, he did that very thing, and did it exceedingly well. In fact, in the historic advertisement, Pascual Rosé set an example and established a copy standard which had a very beneficial effect on all the coffee advertising of that early date. This will be evident from a glance at the accompanying exhibits of other early advertisements. It was not until the days of so-called modern advertising that coffee publicity reached a low water mark in efficiency and value. In these dark days, most coffee advertisers ignored the principles discovered and applied in other lines of grocery merchandising. Instead of telling their public how good their product was, they actually followed the opposite course and warned the public against the dangers of coffee drinking. Instead of saying to the public, "Coffee has many virtues and our brand is one of the best examples," their text said in effect, "Coffee has many deleterious properties, some or most of which have been eliminated in our particular brand." They were, for the most part, apostles of negation. Hopeful signs, however, are multiplying that this condition of things in the coffee industry has passed, and that the practice of telling the coffee story with certitude will soon become general. We may well applaud the publicity work of all coffee advertisers who follow where Pascual Rosé led, those who tell the public how good coffee is to drink and how much good it does you if you drink it. Considering the advertising and typographical resources available to the modern advertiser, it certainly should be possible for this message to be conveyed to the public with at least some of the charm of the first coffee message. One of the most notable examples of how to advertise coffee well is that set by UBAN Coffee. Unquestionably, UBAN is doing in a thoroughly up-to-date and appropriate fashion what Pascual Rosé started out to do in 1652. The effect on those who give only a superficial glance at a UBAN advertisement is to arouse a keen desire to enjoy a cup of UBAN coffee. To induce such a state of mind is, of course, the object of all good advertising. UBAN advertisements have utilized two vital principles in influencing the minds of consumers. In the first place, they have made a cup of coffee seem to be a very delectable drink. In the second place, they have made the serving of a cup of coffee seem to be of the greatest social value. One does not see in a UBAN advertisement any reference to the removal of caffeine or to UBAN's freedom from defects common to other coffees. There is no reference to the ill effects of drinking ordinary coffee. U-Ban wastes no valuable space in unselling coffee. Instead, the whole intent, effectively carried out, is to paint an enticing picture by descriptive phraseology, typographic manner, and illustrative treatment. Until U-Ban came, those of us in the coffee trade who had given the matter thought had often wondered why, with the wealth of material available to writers of coffee advertisements, so little had been done to make the product alluring. Why so little had been done to give atmosphere to the product. So many interesting things may be said about the history of coffee, the spread of the industry through various countries, how Brazil came to be the coffee-producing country of the world, how coffee is cultivated, harvested, and shipped, how it is stored, roasted, handled, delivered. In short, the entire process by which coffee reaches the breakfast table from the plantations of the tropics. U-Ban made effective use of this material. Simply to tell these things in an interesting, natural, convincing way makes coffee appear as a healthful, delicious drink, whereas the negative, defensive sort of advertising that plays into the hands of the substitutes puts coffee in the wrong light. When one reads U-Ban advertisements, they are seen to be an entirely acceptable and appropriate presentation of coffee merit and thoroughly in accord with the principles of good advertising, as exemplified in all other lines of trade. The wonder grows why so many coffee advertisers have been content to remain in the defensive, controversial position into which the alarmist coffee substitute advertising has jockeyed them. The U-Ban advertisements are not without their faults. Errors of historical facts can be found in them. Definitions are sometimes mixed. Some of the drawings might be better, but in the main, the copy is convincing and praiseworthy. In U-Ban advertisements, the things that have been so long left undone have now been done in a masterful way. If we refer to the accompanying illustrations, we can see how effectively the public is being led to realize and believe in 1. The intrinsic desirability of coffee, the actual pleasure to be derived from the act of partaking of it. 2. That it is delightful medium for social intercourse, part of the essential equipment for an intimate chat or more general assemblage of friends. 3. That its proper service is a badge of social distinction, the mark of a successful hostess. These 3 thoughts, dominant in U-Ban advertising, should be woven into the fabric of all coffee advertising. For with these 3 thoughts, Arbuckle Brothers have blazed the trail for the right thing in coffee advertising. The U-Ban case has been so largely dwelt upon here because it sets so bright and shining an example. Much that is praiseworthy in it, and more along the same lines, is true of White House, Hotel Astor, and Seal brand, but the copy shown will illustrate this better than any comment. End of section 44. Read by Kyle Stedman, Rockford, Illinois.